Hey friends, visit patreon.com/femfreak to join our podcast community.
Yeah, we can have a conversation about like our personal information and who has access to it and to what purposes that information is being used. But what's really going on here is that the devil cannot abide to be mocked.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by two women who are way too broke to give Disney Plus 30 of their hard-earned Corona bucks to watch a movie. Carolyn Pettit.
Seriously, though, seriously, that's ridiculous.
And Ebony Adams.
For reals.
This week we're going to be talking about some entertainment news, the roundup of the things that we've been itching to chat about over in the worlds of film, TV, and gaming over the last week, month, whatever. This is a loosey-goosey. So stay tuned to find out what we care about.
what we care about. This is what's most important to us in the whole world right now.
Yep.
Is this stuff. No, that's
pop culture news.
Yep.
All right. Well,
I'm just giving you a hard time, Anita.
It's as it should be. Yeah. It's as it should be. I actually, because this is entertainment news, it's what we care about in entertainment news. But as you said that, I was like, what is happening in Beirut and what has been happening in Lebanon has been really difficult to watch, and really, it's a huge problem. I'm not explaining any of this well because that's what this episode's going to be like. But I do kind of want to acknowledge that that's a thing that's happening at this moment of recording. Not that this matters, but I have family in Beirut, so it's an issue that is close to home for me. But it's something that I think that this is a really great example of how yes, there was an explosion, and it was caused by delinquency, right? But by bureaucracy, by inaction, that created, literal death and destruction. But there's been so many structural, financial, economic problems in Lebanon for a while now, and it's just all being compounded, and it's really a horrible situation. So, donate to them. Donate to organizations that are providing support and relief in Beirut right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And right before we recorded this, I had a good cry watching a CNN segment about, some of the stories of people who have died recently to COVID-19. I think that they're saying, it's basically one person dying per minute, and the death toll, is just obviously constantly on the rise here in the U.S. right now. So, keeping everything in perspective, of course, with what's with all the tragic events that are happening in the world right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I am kind of glad you called me out on that phrasing, just so that we're clear. We're talking about entertainment news here, but we also care about probably more in some ways about some of the bigger, really devastating tragedies that have been continuing to happen right now. So that said, let's talk about price gouging.
Well,
Ebony?
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about these globe-straddling corporations who already, move and, negotiate these huge sums of money, requiring more from us, right? So news dropped this week that Disney is going to be releasing Mulan and Black Widow VOD on their Disney Plus platform for the low price of $30 in lieu of a theatrical release. Now, there's a lot of ways to feel about this, and by no means do I want to suggest that the way I feel about it is the way that anyone else needs to feel about it. Particularly, I'm really sympathetic to parents, or people who have little ones in these quarantine pods who are yo, anything that will keep this motherfucker occupied for 90 minutes, I would be willing to pay buku Corona bucks for. So I get it, I get it. And I would much rather people watch these things in their homes versus, go out to a theater right now. Like, it blows my mind that there are theaters open in, like, I'm going to say, like, Kentucky, Ohio. There's several states where theaters are open right now. And I'm just like, what? What are we doing? But just the notion that I pay for Disney Plus, like, I have a subscription to it because I need to rewatch, well, you don't need to know what I rewatch constantly on that platform, but I value it enough to pay $6.99 a month for it. And also I do the, low-key discount socialist thing of sharing my subscription with anyone who asks. So my brother and his family watch it. But I'm like, wait, you gonna ask me for another $30 to watch this movie? Yes, I get that if we were gonna go to a theater, we'd be paying more. Yes, I know that we need to support these, creators with our dollars. Otherwise, stuff doesn't get made. But you already have this money. Like, Disney is not hurting for bucks. It's smaller independent movies that I'm concerned about. Mulan, Black Widow, y'all gonna be fine. You will really, truly be fine.
Yeah, and there's also the interesting question here. I mean, obviously, I think that it's outrageous the way that Disney as a corporation has, like, shuffled money up to its, like, executives while, it's there are park employees and things who were already like living in their cars and whatnot, who have really suffered during this pandemic. Like the way that Disney handles their money just is straight up, like, objectionable, like obscene and really just terrible. But, like, there's also another angle here that I think is worth mentioning, which is these specific films that are being, moved to Disney Plus in lieu of a theatrical release. Like, is it something about these films specifically? Mulan with its Asian cast, Black Widow with its, female lead, female focus, that make Disney feel like, well, it's okay if these don't get a big theatrical release, whereas other films, like, they wouldn't. Maybe we don't know yet, because it may come to pass that some other films that star a platoon of white dudes, white male megastars or whatever, will get this treatment as well. But so I think Nia DaCosta, who is somebody we're going to talk about in relation to other news in a moment, but is a Black a film director in her own right, tweeted about this issue, saying I quote, this is her tweet, quote, "I wasn't particularly interested in Mulan, but it's a bummer that a film of this scope with an Asian cast won't have its due a worldwide theatrical release. We should all pay close attention to the movies whose theatrical releases are protected and those that are not."
And like, when I saw that tweet, I, like many people, immediately thought of the movie Tenet, right? Like, that the release for that keeps getting pushed back. But, as Nia DaCosta and others have said, like, which films are deemed not important enough to wait for a theatrical release? Because there are, like, benefits and there is a status accorded to having that theatrical release. For one thing, awards, like, we still don't know, how awards are going to be handled for these films that are getting, VOD releases as opposed to standard theatrical releases. Like, this stuff matters. And it matters in terms of who gets hired to do what kinds of jobs, what level they are, allowed to progress in their careers. Like, it matters. It is more than just a question of, do I want people to see things, surround sound, THX, whatever. It's a larger issue than that.
Yeah.
Anita, you gonna be paying that $30? I know what a huge Scarlett Johansson fan you are.
Oh my God. That was mean. Hey, I have backtracked that long grudge I've had. Although I still think that I don't like her as Black Widow. Whatever. Yeah. Anyways, all right. Let's move on.
You didn't answer my question. You gonna pay that $30?
No, maybe. I'm curious about Mulan. And maybe we'll do like you said, $30 sounds totally batshit, especially on top of, like, having, like, you have to have. Actually, can you rent it without having a subscription to Disney Plus?
Right.
I don't know, but I wonder if it's like Black is King or Hamilton. Like, you actually have to have a subscription.
Yeah, exactly.
In which case it's further
$7.
funneling. Yeah.
Yeah, on top of 30. Anyways, like, I don't think it's don't think it's right, but I kind of get that, like, if you all went to the theater, like, if the three of us share, but, like, rented it and shared the $130, it'd still be cheaper than the three of us going into the theater. But also, like, new times, get with it, Disney, whatever, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, we'll see. But I regardless of all of the complicated factors that you've all just brought up, like, I am curious about Mulan in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have liked to have seen it in the theaters, but
Yeah.
we can't do that now because we can't have nice things.
Drive in.
All right, Carolyn, what are you thinking about?
Okay, so there's a comic strip called Six Chix, Six Chix, Chix. It's a syndicated strip that runs in a plethora of papers across the country. And one of the cartoonists on the strip is a Black cartoonist named Bianca Xunise. And she drew a strip that ran recently that caused such a controversy that I believe Six Chix has now been removed from a number of papers because they were so like outraged by the content of this particular strip. And I just think the strip itself and Xunise's explanation for what the strip is doing is so worthwhile and important to talk about. So real quick, the strip itself depicts a Black woman wearing a mask and a T-shirt that says "I can't breathe," and it's a stand-in for the cartoonist herself. And she's like apparently she's obviously like standing in line at the grocery store. The T-shirt says "I can't breathe," and next to her is a older white woman in line at the grocery store who is not wearing a mask. And the white woman says to the Black woman, "If you can't breathe, then take that silly mask off." And so, so I'm reading from a Twitter thread by Bianca Xunise about the strip. She says, "Okay, now to explain this comic because everyone has been getting it wrong. It's easy to assume that the white woman talking to me is a racist. That may or may not be true, but that is not the point. The point is how white people see issues that affect Black peoples as trivial. The whole mask debate has been compared to oppression, which I find incredibly offensive. The fact that white peoples want to claim oppression now for having to do their civic duty of protecting others is not the Black struggle whatsoever. White people have assumed for generations that racism is simply about our sensitivity and not a systemic issue. Furthermore, I want the comic to challenge liberal whites who assume that every white person they feel superior over is racist. This is just a random white woman. I don't know her." So, yeah, and because of this strip, it was pulled from many, many newspapers. And in fact, like an apology was run for the strip, which Xunise herself did not in any way like approve or like, sign off on. So she, herself has said like, "I'm being silenced over white feelings from a gag comic." Anyway, for the record, I do not apologize for this comic, and this is censorship, Xunise has said. So anyway, just a really pointed, really layered, one-panel comic that I think gets at the heart of why the like non-maskers positions are such bullshit and rooted in such like white privilege. And anyway, and I thought her way of explaining what the comic was doing was so pointed and so precise. So anyway,
the comic itself is wonderful.
Yeah,
like it does what you would expect political cartoons to do, right? Where it's like it's almost like a punch in the gut in some ways. This makes me think about the idea, the like long-standing myth of the like liberal media. Right, the long-standing myth of like the media is on the side of liberals, and I'm like, but that like we all know that that's not true. But this is a great example of that. Like, there's no reason that this should have gotten pulled at all. Like, it is a statement, but it's not whatever. So and I've been doing some research around like algorithms, and there's some news around Facebook recently that like they've been more lenient to misinformation coming from like alt-right groups and like and the groups that are actually spreading all of this misinformation. And so it just feels related to this larger equation of our social media and our press like really actually starting to censor and silence like leftist voices, or at least I don't know.
To kind of paper over the uncomfortable, like, you know, like not wanting to make white people uncomfortable with our racism, right? And yeah.
I mean, the apology that was posted was so over the top and so groveling from these outlets that canceled the Stripped. Excuse me. And so I saw the apology before I saw the actual comic and was completely blown away, you know, because I thought when I saw the apology, like, wow, okay, what was in there? That they felt this was necessary. And as pointed, as intelligent, as, you know, like direct as the comic is, you know, to my mind, you know, because I, you know, like walk in certain circles where, you know, like my own echo chamber of Ebony is, you know, it seems like such a given, the message of this comic, that I couldn't quite believe, like, this is it. This is the thing that has provoked such a strong reaction. And you can imagine that it had to have, like, they had to have gotten so many calls or gotten calls from, you know, so many of the right kinds of people, read white people, for them to have taken this drastic step. But excuse me, it is ultimately so banal what the comic offers, you know, like, and it just, you know, it reminded me, like, oh yeah, there are people for whom this equation, just the like laying bare of their own hypocrisy, is simply too much to face, you know? Like, the problem is that you pointed it out. Not that I don't subscribe to these beliefs, but the problem is that you have the gall to make me try and face it and make me look ridiculous. Like, that's ultimately what the issue is. It's just, it blew me away.
I like that, laying bare of their hypocrisy is very nice phrasing.
Take it. Use it.
I love it. I'm not going to. I'm just going to take a moment to appreciate it. Speaking of censorship, let's talk about TikTok. All right, y'all. This is the dumbest. We are in the dumbest timeline. It's so ridiculous. So TikTok, I'm sure you've heard of it. If you haven't seen it, it is a social media platform where people make videos. Big surprise, whatever. It is owned by a Chinese company named ByteDance. And the American president, Mr. Donald Trump, is personally offended by the things that are on TikTok, and therefore he has declared a national state of emergency with regards to this social media app, and is actually putting in an executive order to ban transactions with the parent company, TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, as well as WeChat, which is a Chinese texting app. This is wild. So a couple of things I want to bring up about this. One is, a couple things. This is clearly a part of this ongoing feud that Trump is personally waging against China. Like that, there's no doubt that that's a part of this. There's also an enormous amount of anti-Trump sentiment on the platform. So, you know, Sarah Cooper has gained enormous notoriety with her ridiculing of Trump, but by far, like, one of many examples of folks on that platform using the platform to, you know, dismiss, critique, attack Trump and his really racist, horrible beliefs and policies. And so it feels a little bit like a combination of, like, we are going after China. He can't shut down the American social media companies, so this is like the only one that he can actually do something to. And the real kicker of all of this is that Microsoft is in talks to buy the rights to run TikTok in America, and there is like this weird communication dance that's happening between literally the president and Microsoft, because the executive order comes into place like after the date in which Microsoft could potentially purchase the rights to TikTok. Does that make sense? It's super weird. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest. I haven't read up on, nor do I understand like all of the legalities surrounding this. But I am floored by just the very idea. I mean, this obviously is something that is an eruption of Trump's I think fragile ego, and just like the idea. This is definitely one of those moments where, you know, I almost, like, in spite of myself, I find myself missing just a president who, like Obama, who behaves more what we might call presidentially, where like during a time like this, would be, of course, speaking with poignancy and emotion and delicacy about like the tragedies of coronavirus. Perhaps would have made some really moving speech and about the tragedy in Beirut, and like made to talk of like sending aid or these kinds of things. And what's happening from Trump is national emergency. TikTok is a national emergency. It's just that like surreal, that extremely like surreal feeling of like how can this even be real at a moment like this, that this is what the president is preoccupied with, and this is what he's using his executive powers to do, right?
It's so wildly offensive. I need a bigger word than offensive here, that forces like I think we've talked about this on the we did talk about this. Forces in the oh God, Portland, help me out here. What is happening in Portland with silencing activists, kidnapping them, like in these horrific sort of like
like secret
ways.
Police
yes,
style.
thank you.
Unmarked vans.
Yeah. That like that's not a national emergency.
I mean, that is the hand of the state itself, though. That is
exactly,
like Trump like doing that, right? So
totally.
So of course that's not. But I mean, yes, it should be. It should be like an affront to all of our sense of like freedoms and what America should be and all of that. But obviously, it's not, because that is the fascist.
Well, right, and because so many people, again, read white people, believe that they will never, ever be targets of the state, which is both wildly false, but also, again, reveals who is granted the status of human and citizen in this country. But this whole thing with TikTok is so worrying. Like it's funny and it's ridiculous, but it is so worrying because it's like so many different things are getting muddied, right? So Trump's, part of his rationale is that, we need to be concerned about like the data mining that this Chinese company is doing. And like, yeah, we can have a conversation about like our personal, information and who has access to it and to what purposes that information is being used. But what, as you've said, like what's really going on here is that, the devil cannot abide to be mocked. Like Trump and his incredibly fragile ego and his administration are actively stamping down on dissent. And yes, sometimes, dissent is, being out in the streets, but it is also what like these young folks are doing on, TikTok and things like it. Like the notion that you would dare say something that, criticizes him or sets him up as a figure of ridicule is absolutely beyond the pale for him and for people who have traditionally had power and have had that power unquestioned. I mean, that's ultimately what's behind this. Like, we don't see any of this like tamping down on like Facebook or Twitter, for instance, because those platforms are both guilty of propping up the state in ways that like people way smarter than me have talked about. But because TikTok, like there's something generational going on there. Like it's this, the ways in which like young kids, we talk about that, like that Trump rally where supposedly, all these teenagers were reserving tickets. And then it turns out that, no one showed up and, Trump looked a fool. Like this is what you must never do to the abusive figure, is hold them up to ridicule. And so it's worrying, And so like I said, it's so funny, but it's also like, this is just, one more step that, one more inch that we're sliding down into this morass of fascism. And I'm like, what are we doing? What? Well,
and this is a big, like the other thing here is like, how much power does the president hold unilaterally?
Mm-hmm.
Like
right.
that the president can do this with an executive order? What the fuck?
Right. And we're being, even if we react to these things and manage to overturn them, the fact is that he was allowed to do them in the first place. And some of this damage cannot be undone. Like, at one point, are we going to be proactive, and remove this man from office, is my question.
Right. There's to go back to, like, I think one of the problems of blind spots with, say, the liberal media, right, which has repeatedly done that thing where when Trump will shift his tone on something for a day, they'll fall over themselves writing stories about Trump finally, demonstrates gravitas as he begins to take the coronavirus seriously. And then, like, the next day, Trump is out there just saying the same, just arrogant, stupid shit. Once again, like, there's similarly this sense with the media, the mainstream media, very broadly of like, oh, Trump can't do that. Don't worry. Like, there are checks and balances. Like, Trump can't do that. But yet again and again, he just sort of does these things, and the checks and balances, like, aren't actually working because, whatever, like, because there's enough Republicans on Trump's side that they're not going, in the Senate and whatnot, that they're not going to hold him accountable or what have you. So yeah, there is that real feeling that, like, if Trump can do this with TikTok, like, where does it end, right? I mean, yes, he can. Right now, there can be the pretense of, well, it's China. It's the data collecting, etc. But we all, I mean, at this point, like, Trump just keeps pushing the line further and further. Like there's no reason to think that this won't this won't shift to domestic corporations and platforms and things.
Well,
soon
and
as well.
Legally speaking, is like, even if Trump does all these things that are illegal, which we or unconstitutional, which have been proven and shown, to do anything about it, like, I guess, like, quote unquote properly, you have to go through our legal system, which is hella slow. So it doesn't really matter the legalities of any of this, because he can still make it happen, and the harm can still be also happen. I do want to bring up the privacy thing really quick. So I think that's related here because TikTok gathers a lot of personal data. There is concern about, like, the Chinese government having access to that data and what that means. Facebook also collects a lot of personal data, right? Like, let's be clear that, like, don't get on your high horse about this just yet. And there are differences without a doubt, but don't think that, like, being on Facebook is absolves you of there's any security there. Sarah Jiang, in a article for The Verge about this, says, when it comes down to it, the thorniest privacy dispute of 2020 isn't about privacy or technology at all. It's about China. The question, is Facebook better, worse, or the same as TikTok, is more or less the same as, is the United States better, worse, or the same as China?
Right.
And then super last point on this. I don't know the details of this, but there's something around Tencent getting pulled into this problem and Tencent is a massive Chinese entertainment company that has huge ties in gaming and huge ties to American game companies. And so there is a question of, like, is this going to have spillover to folks like Riot Games, for example, and League of Legends and all these other companies that also do business with Tencent and in Chinese markets? So this is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, like, it's not just about, like, funny videos of Tabitha Brown with her daughter, like, come on.
Yeah.
Wake up, people.
Carolyn mentioned Nia DaCosta earlier. Ebony, do you want to tell us who she is and why she's in the news right now?
Yeah, I would love to. So, Nia DaCosta is fucking amazing. So, if you are like me, i.e. someone who cares about good media, then you are excited about the upcoming Candyman remake that Nia DaCosta is the director of. Like, this movie is just going to be so bomb. Again, remake of the, like, just iconic horror film from the, what was it, late 80s, early 90s with Tony Todd, about, go check out the original. But I'm so excited for this new one. Anyways, just recently, in fact, I think yesterday at the time of this recording, Nia DaCosta, who is a Black woman, was announced as the director of Captain Marvel 2. So this is huge news. Like, only the second Black woman to direct a superhero film. And I mean, Marvel doesn't fuck around with their money, y'all. Like, Nia DaCosta may not be a person that you've heard of, but the fact that Marvel is entrusting her with, a significant entry into the franchise, like, say what you will, about, like, toxic fanboy reactions to the first Captain Marvel movie, that movie made a lot of money. Folks really enjoyed it, and it really struck a chord, particularly with young women and young girls. And so I'm absolutely just in love with the idea of Nia DaCosta directing the sequel, and I'm hopeful that this means that we will get even more of Monica Rambeau in the sequel. In fact, let's have the queer love story that we should have gotten in the first Captain Marvel movie. But yeah, I mean, like, okay, we could have larger conversations, and I'm sure we will, because I guarantee we're going to be talking about Captain Marvel 2 on the podcast in 2035 when theaters open back up again. But so
we're going to be so old.
I'm already so old. So,
I know. We're going to be so much older.
I'm going to be recording that shit in the hospice. It's going to be the last thing I do, and I will regret it.
Can we have rooms next to each other, the three of us, and we'll still do this podcast, even though we'll just be like watching whatever the equivalent of Golden Girls reruns are?
I wouldn't do that to Carol. Like, I don't want her final days to have to be putting up with my bullshit. And Anita, you're 10 years younger than I am. So you better not be in the hospice at the same time. It will mean you have made some incredibly bad choices in the interim.
It's true. I mean, that can already be accounted for.
but yeah, like, so I am excited about this, you know? I do think that, like, there is, without lapsing too far into sparkling generalities, I do think that there will be a different sensibility behind this film. Like, we already know that the Captain Marvel movies, or excuse me, the character of Captain Marvel, as she's been presented in the first movie, is something that, you know, like, is so female forward, you know, not just as a kind of superficial gloss in the way that, like, I Fear the Black Widow movie was. And so I'm hopeful that we'll get it even more of that in the sequel. And as I said, like, I think, you know, we're going to get, like, I just can't imagine Nia DaCosta directing a movie in which Monica Rambeau does not have a more prominent part. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
Let's
go. That's like the only piece of good news that we have in our this week. It's entertainment news. Yeah. Speaking of good news, Carolyn, you want to tell us how trash Ellen is?
Well, okay, yes, sure. So, I mean, I think it's been, let us say, rumors have swirled around Ellen DeGeneres for folks in, you know, who work sort of in rank and file parts of the entertainment industry, TV, for many, many, many years, about Ellen herself being, like, really ruthless and cruel, and just the whole culture around her show, the Ellen, you know, the smash hit Ellen talk show, which of course is an emblem of, like, niceness, right? I mean, that's sort of the delicious twist to all of this, is how much Ellen's brand and Ellen as a figure kind of leverage, like, niceness and politeness, and she's as like a defining kind of quality. And, like, I think a lot of us confronted this explicitly somehow when she was like hobnobbing with George W. Bush, right? And a lot of us were like, yeah, but he's a fucking war criminal. Like it's not cool to be nice to people like that. And she's like, no, and she's like, you be nice to everyone. And, like, so we can just have those larger philosophical discussions about what does it even mean to be nice or kind, like to actually be decent sort of predicates not treating war criminals as cool buddy people that you hang out with, etc. But anyway, like, things have really come to exploded in recent weeks in a way that, you know, these things that for a long time were just simmering rumors are now being made explicit as many people have come forward about really their experience, you know, former employees of the Ellen Show coming forward about the sexual harassment, just the whole culture of, like, toxicity and ugliness and cruelty that exists on the show. And really, what's I guess the most fascinating to me about this whole thing is the way in which many celebrities, you know, are kind of closing ranks around Ellen and, like, supporting her in this, and actually, like, perpetuating the idea that Ellen herself is a very nice, kind, you know, decent person. when, of course, like any of us who are like working class have worked in like sort of more rank and file jobs, etc. Or I think most of us are intimately familiar with the ways in which people who have certain amount of money and power and privilege can be very, very kind or warm to each other and treat the people below them like absolute shit, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the case at the Ellen show, is that of course celebrities get along with Ellen. She's nice to them. She, whatever, she treats them as peers. She invites them. They all come to her birthday party, whatever. But that doesn't mean that the people who actually work to make the show happen are treated with the respect that they deserve. So for instance, one person who tweeted in support of Ellen was Jay Leno. With a very, kind of just generic tweet that just says, "I don't discard a 40-year friendship on hearsay. The Ellen I know has raised over $125 million for charity and has always been a kind and decent person. I fully support her, Jay Leno." Like, first of all, and also that bogus notion that philanthropy from like, hundred millionaires and billionaires like actually means anything in terms of their character or their quality. But this tweet was quote tweeted by a Twitter account named Kia Speaks, and they said of Jay Leno's tweet, "As someone who does digital strategy, I can recognize a digital campaign when I see one. These fools received an I Love Ellen toolkit via Google Drive full of tweets they could just copy and paste, and here we are." So, like that campaign among celebrities to protect and shore up Ellen's image as like a decent person, while the brand that has been built up over all these years is really just rapidly like crumbling before all of our eyes. Is anyway, it's really something to behold.
It really is, and what's one of the things that's interesting is the way that we're having this conversation about how you can be a member of one like marginalized community or one community that is disempowered, while also participating in disempowering others from another subject position. So the fact that, Ellen is a queer woman does not mean that she is unable to be abusive herself, like that dog don't hunt, as country folks say, And so there's this undercurrent to some of the defenses of her that like, oh, a man at the top, who's so divorced from what goes on among the lower rank and file employees would never be held to this standard and whatever and blah, blah. And it's like, like you can be shitty even though you, like, as I say, in one area of your life, like not all of your identity categories may not be ones of privilege, but that does not mean you are unable to participate in, exploitation or abuse of others. But yeah, Carol, like this notion that like, it's so like strikingly tone deaf, the way that these celebrities come out and they're like, well, she's never been that way to me. Well, of course she wouldn't, Jay Leno, of course she wouldn't. Right. Kevin Hart, Katy Perry, like her career, her job is literally about being nice to you and cozying up to you. She would not have the career that she has if she was an asshole to you, That does not matter. That does not signify. That's not what we're talking about here. And so the fact that you think that that's sufficient, how she treats, Ashton Kutcher, give me a fucking break. And then Portia de Rossi, her wife, posting that Instagram graphic that's like, hashtag I stand with Ellen. Are you fucking kidding me right now? I stand with Ellen like she's a victim, of trafficking or something. Like, are you kidding me? If y'all don't go somewhere and sit down in your multi-million-dollar Calabasas home, I'm going to lose my shit.
I don't know why I just thought of this. It's like tangentially related, but like I consider myself a very low-key, lazy feminist pop culture historian, like super low-key, y'all. That's whatever. I don't know all the things. But, there are tentpole media from the 90s that I think we can call back to in a lot of ways to look at the history of the progression of intersectional feminism in our media. And Roseanne is an example of that, right? So Roseanne, the original show, there's all this analysis around how it really was mainstreaming celebration around queerness and class and body size and all of these things. But then Roseanne became a fucking monster, right? And I feel like that's sort of with Ellen, is it just reminded me of this, where like Ellen coming out on national TV was such a big deal. And like I do reference it regularly when related to talking about where we've come and what that looks like. And it's just another example of when you have to be like, and now they suck. Like we got to remove the individual from the reality of the impact that this situation or this piece of media had.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Whew.
Cool. Great. Speaking of shitty, powerful people, I'm killing it with these transitions
Yeah,
today.
you are.
I can't articulate a thought to save my life right now, but I can do a transition. So just enjoy this moment with me. Ebony,
Okay.
you want to talk about what's going on at Bon Appetit?
So Bon Appetit has made just an incredible name for itself, particularly in the video space recently with their test kitchen videos, with these just wonderful personalities, many of whom are people of color. People like Privya Krishna, Rick Martinez, Sola El Wali, who just have developed like these huge followings on the platform. Excuse me. And as I said, really elevated Bon Appetit, which granted, Bon Appetit was a brand that was well known before their test kitchen and, these cooking videos, but it's really elevated it most recently, right? So a few months ago, the editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit came under fire because a picture surfaced of him in brownface. He resigned, but in the course of that, the discussions around that, it was revealed that the talent of color in these Bon Appetit videos were either not being compensated at all for these videos that they were producing. And these are things with like millions of views, right? Like it is drawing in substantial revenue for the brand. So they either weren't being compensated at all, or they were being compensated so unfairly compared to their white colleagues, even though like the talent level and the amount of work that was required of them vastly outweighed what was being asked of the white talent. So this was a huge, huge thing. And so many of the talent of color effectively went, like boycotted, so they took a hiatus from producing any content for the brand while negotiations were happening to increase, like contract negotiations were happening to get them the money that they justifiably deserved. So now we are starting to hear that after like months-long negotiations, despite all their protestations to the contrary, Bon Appetit is still committed to being on their fuck shit and not giving these people the money that they deserve. Like it was a just colossal PR fuck up on their part, the way that this was handled. After going through that, after making all these declarations, about a commitment to equity and diversity and, redressing harms from the past, to then quietly keep doing the same shit you were doing before, just seems like, let's not even talk about unethical. It just seems like incredibly stupid. And so like a lot of their most popular stars are leaving. Now, I got to be honest with you. I only cared about Sola El Wali. Like, I love her. That's my girl, but this is part of a larger trend of the way that people of color in this country, but, in the global, like cuisine media, first of all, are never able to ascend to the heights of white cooks and particularly white men in this world, but also the ways in which they are asked to prop up their white peers and, represent their culture, in the world of cuisine in a way that we don't ask of white chefs. So for instance, someone's like Rick Bayless, who is a white dude, is acknowledged as like this master of Mexican cooking, right? But we don't have, people like numbers of people of chefs of color who are allowed to step outside of what's considered their lane and their zone. So, Sola El Wali talked about this, like she and her husband, used to have a restaurant and they were not producing the kind of ethnic cuisine that was expected of them. And the restaurant folded, We're not expecting like a Kenyan guy to be, head chef of a French kitchen. We expect people to cook essentially the way they look, if that makes sense. And so it's this huge, larger discussion. And Anita, I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about this, because I know that like you live, eat and breathe food and food media. This is the work you should be doing. Forget Feminist Frequency Radio. You need a cooking show.
I mean, I wish. I think you covered that super well. And what I want to add is actually not related to the food part of this, is the accountability piece. Because I think that, so a lot of the work that I've been doing in the game space over the last several months is really about or actually the last year is about like, what does it mean for these companies to be accountable? And I think we're having these like much larger conversations right now as all of these companies are being called out for abuse and toxicity and racism and unjust labor practices. Like, we don't have time to get into the Blizzard news today, but if you are familiar with what's happening with Blizzard, like that's related to this as well. Ubisoft is like top of the list right now too, in terms of like, what are they going to do to deal with the reckoning that's come their way? And so I think that this is a really great example, and I'm really glad Privia stepped up and said something publicly about this, because like all these companies are saying that they're going to do things, but like, are they? And are we just going to forget? Like, are they just doing crisis PR and just hoping that it gets brushed over and not have to do any real structural change and not have to do any accountability to their employees and the community? And so I'm just putting that out there of like, what does it mean to hold these companies accountable? Like, what time period can pass before we're like, okay, you didn't do the work, right? You didn't actually put in the effort to make the changes that were needed. And so I'm really intrigued to see what comes of the like everything that's been happening this year. And that there's going to be something else tomorrow, where people are just fed up, man. They're just fucking fed up, and folks are coming out and they're just like airing all of the laundry and calling out all of these powerful people for their bullshit. So, yeah. That's one of the things I was thinking about with regards to this is like, hell yeah, call them out. They didn't do their shit, and they don't get to get away with having some like hollow statement about how they're gonna do it. Like, when are you gonna fucking do it?
Right. And just last thing, watch their space, because I am almost certain that what's going to happen now that these high profile people of color have left, they will attempt to replace them with just some other random brown people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, they're just going to try and slide
and they'll pat themselves on the back for it, too. Yeah, they'll be like, exactly. Look at us. Or they'll do some really gross social media highlighting to show how, like, oh, bleh. All right, y'all. We'll be right back with our weekly freakouts.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening to FFR. If you enjoy spending a little time with us each week, please consider helping us continue to do the show by heading over to patreon.com/femfreak. Your support will enable us to stay on top of all the latest pop culture trends week in and week out, and you can get nifty perks like early access, bonus episodes, and friendly online communities where you can hang out with your fellow listeners. Go to patreon.com/femfreak today. Operators are standing by.
What's your freak out?
Now it's time to talk even more about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Carolyn?
This past week I watched a documentary called What She Said, The Art of Pauline Kael. And so Pauline Kael was for many years the chief film critic for The New Yorker, and she was a legendary critic, but really a very divisive critic, a very galvanizing critic, a critic who had her own she wrote very subjectively about her experience of cinema, and so the thing about What She Said, the documentary, is that it's not a great film in and of its own right. It's structurally whatever. It's just a very kind of straightforward documentary with a lot of like talking head interviews and stuff. It's not anything interesting, so it's probably not the kind of film that Pauline Kael herself would have liked very much. But as a critic myself, I really loved seeing and hearing so much of Pauline Kael on screen because she is a critic whose ethos as a critic I have so much respect for. Now, I have a lot of issues with Pauline Kael as a critic. She doesn't, in my mind, have a very rigorous at all, like, feminist, outlook, or she's not necessarily great at all on matters of race, things like that. Like, I have a lot of problems with her as a critic, but what I admire about her, what I respect about her so much is that she represents, I think, just a philosophy about criticism that I feel is so lacking today. And it was very even in her own time, there was so much resistance to it, right? Movie studios tried to oust her or keep her out of screenings because they hated the way, that she would just pan their films. Anyway, there was a lot of pressure for, a lot of publications would, like, McCall's hired her for a little while, but she was so out of step with their readership that they dropped her. But, I look at the state of games criticism today, and personally, I think it is absolutely dire, right? You can go on Metacritic and you can look at, like most AAA games, with the exception, The Last of Us Part 2 is, like, a rare exception that provoked a kind of diversity in terms of reactions. But, there's so much consensus around games like, say, Doom Eternal, whatever, right? This AAA shooter extravaganza, where, I think that game should be getting 2s and 4s and 8s and 9s, and it should be passionately embraced by some critics, passionately panned by others, but that's not what we have at all, because we have this tendency toward consensus. We have this narrow sense of how to be a critic and how to review something, and I long for a return to a kind of criticism like what Pauline Kael represented, in the sense of just how she wrote from very subjectively from her core, and how reading a Pauline Kael review was not about, it's not this idea of find critics you agree with. It's about being stimulated and challenged and having your own perspective broadened, and maybe even if you passionately disagree, right, with what Pauline Kael is saying, you still get something out of the review because of how she articulates her own perspective. If you care about the history of criticism, film criticism, if you care about where game criticism is right now, etc., I would definitely recommend checking out this film for a portrait of a critic who I think represented something that we have lost and that I hope we get back.
That sounds great, actually.
Yeah.
I'm like,
you will. I mean, Anita. You will definitely be you will object to her perspectives so strenuously. I want to make that very, very clear. And she defends films that I think are damaging, are actually harmful. I want to be very clear that my championing this film has nothing to do with my agreeing with Pauline Kael's perspective. It has everything to do with how she represented a particular deeply held, fierce subjectivity as a critic. So
interesting.
Yes.
All right. Ebony, what have you been reading, watching, doing, playing?
Okay.
Cooking.
Pickles.
Baking. Gardening.
Oh, God, we can't talk about my gardening right now because I'm failing. So for once, the hold list at my local library is coming through in my favor. And I was able to get a book that I've been anticipating for a while pretty quickly. And that book is the new book from Isabel Wilkerson. It's called, excuse me, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. So if the name sounds familiar, Isabel Wilkerson is the woman who wrote The Warmth of Other Suns and received the Pulitzer for it about a decade ago. I believe she is the first Black woman to win a Pulitzer for journalism in this country. So The Warmth of Other Suns, her previous book, is about the Great Migration. This book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, is about racial hierarchies and order in this country. And I'm just getting started with it. And I'm so ready for this conversation. So, I don't have a lot to say about it yet, except that I can't wait to dig further into it. And Wilkerson is just a masterful writer and thinker. And so I encourage other people to check it out. One of the things that I love is that, and this is from an interview in the New York Times, where she says of caste and caste systems, quote, "It does its work invisibly. It's often unseen. I often describe it as the bones and race is the skin. And then class, for example, is the accents and the education and the clothing and the other accoutrement that we can add to ourselves to adjust ourselves, the things that we have control over. I often say that caste is so fixed that if you can act your way out of it, then it's class. But if you cannot act your way out of it, then it's caste." I'm so here for this discussion because I think like there are increasingly ways in which we're talking about class in this country, but Americans as a whole simply do not have the kind of like history of reckoning with class the way that other cultures and other countries do. We just simply don't. It is often perceived as being even in bad taste to mention class. So yeah, just excited to dig further into this book. Isabel Wilkerson, love her. Cool.
I feel like also when we talk about like there over the last decade, there's been an increase in talking about representation and sites of oppression, and class still kind of gets erased in a lot of that. Like when you, especially like even when you're listing out like, and I find myself guilty of this for sure, where I'm just like, gender and race and transphobia and, like, and I'm just like class, even, and class just isn't included in that. And so I'm this book sounds really interesting. And also I encourage us to really center class in our discussions of sites of oppression and when we're demanding better representations.
Yeah, I mean, like class in this country, it runs so counter to the myth of American exceptionalism and the bootstrap myth and the myth of like the American dream that it's anathema to us, to actually full face, acknowledge class and the role that it plays in our lives and the ways that it like its more pernicious effects. So it's something that, we absolutely have to be like vocal and explicit and deliberate about addressing. It can't always be like an also ran and, like the list of oppressions that we face, like racism, homophobia, sexism, and class, it's always like kind of the last thing on the list.
Yeah. And I want to also, Carolyn, acknowledge that you do bring up class a lot. You do mention it a lot.
Class matters to me. I care about class. Yeah.
Absolutely. I didn't want to erase
but your point is very well taken. I mean, I'm over here like cheering on what both of you were saying because I feel that very strongly.
I just finished a book called The Outside by Ada Hoffman. I'm just going to read the description of it because I can't talk today for some reason. Autistic scientist Yasira Shen has developed a radical new energy drive that could change the future of humanity. But when she activates it, reality warps, destroying the space station and everyone aboard. The AI gods who rule the galaxy declare her work heretical, and Yasira is abducted by their agents. Instead of simply executing her, they offer mercy. If she'll help them hunt down a bigger target, her own mysterious vanished mentor. With her homeworld's fate in the balance, Yasira must choose who to trust, the gods and their ruthless post-human angels, or the rebel scientists whose unorthodox mathematics could turn her world inside out.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
So I'll say this. I think... So I realized, Ebony, and because you and I talk about these books a lot, is that like if a book doesn't like blow my mind, I'm hesitant to bring it up on FREQ-Outs as like, holy, this book is amazing, beginning to end. And I'm trying to get out of that. So like this book is interesting. Like there's a lot of really interesting ideas here. The gods, they use language like we would around religion, but the gods are AIs. The angels are like have all this circuitry. Priests can speak to them, but they have to get circuitry put into them as well. Like it's really interesting. There were moments of lulls for me that I was like, okay, I don't know if I like this book. And then other moments that I'm like, oh, that, becomes more interesting. I really liked that it starred an autistic, multiple autistic characters, and they talk about neurodivergence in it. And the author herself is autistic. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in this book. I know we're like super over time, but I do want to shout out, I've been wanting to talk about this. And especially because Ebony, you brought this up. I want to legit freak out about how bullshit the library system is when it gets pushed up against capitalism. Mm-hmm. Because the fact that digital copies are... Right. There's no like limit to how many copies you can make. They don't depreciate. They don't fall apart. You can make hundreds of copies of the same thing. But publishers demand that libraries buy individual copies of digital titles, the way that you would buy a physical book. And they say it's, honoring, author being fairly paid and blah, blah, blah. But we all know authors aren't fairly paid for their work to begin with. What? I don't know anything about that. Anyways, and so I get really, I'm so frustrated every time I go on, Overdrive, which is the app that is used in a lot of US libraries, when it's like there are 46 of 25 copies out and holds and blah blah blah, and I can't get a copy of the fucking book that I want to read that's digital, and it doesn't fucking matter, and so I have to wait like 6 weeks for it to become available when it is a digital book.
Yeah.
And this is totally just like another example of like bullshit capitalism. One, people not getting paid sufficiently for their art, and also like hoarding. Like the sort of capitalist mentality of like getting as much as you can, even out of libraries that are here to serve populations. Right. It pisses me off. And it also pisses me off because I get a lot of anxiety when I don't have a book to read. And so I'm like, do I start another book? Do I like wait for this one? If the hold comes up, then like I'm going to be in the middle of another book and then I'm not going to be able to finish this book. And I'm just like, y'all, this is unnecessary. So
I have like 3 different reading sources on my phone for precisely this reason, Anita. So like, I don't think I would have made it as far into this quarantine as I have without Scribed and their unlimited books. Like, I really don't, and I will pay that $9.99 a month or whatever it is, I will look for pennies and a wishing fountain to pay that if I have to.
I might need to look into that. I don't even know it. I will say that I tried to get the Deep based on your suggestion last week, and it's like, it's going to be like 10 months until I can get access to it. So
damn.
Yeah. I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, but
that's my influence. People heard me freak out and they were like, let me get on Overdrive and put
lots of folks in LA are like listening to this podcast. All right, y'all, we are going to let you go after all of this. We will no longer be holding you hostage. But if you want to submit your own freak out, we would love to hear from you and what you are freaking out about. And you can do that at feministfrequency.com/freakout, FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio, and stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, which is only available to backers of this podcast. Learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.
Later.
Bye.